From Sacramento State, this is Beyond J, taking conversations from campus to the world. I'm your host, Philip Allstott. We often think of theater, and all art for that matter, as a vehicle for change, whether it be to directly comment on social or political issues or to expose audience members to new ideas or perspectives. Erin Kaplan, a professor of theater and dance at Sac State, takes that concept even farther. She's a longtime practitioner of a tradition known as theater of the oppressed, which seeks to enact social and political change by involving the audience in the production. She has also conducted theater workshops in prisons, something she first became involved with as an undergraduate student at the University of Michigan. Most recently at Sac State, she led workshops in the spring for incarcerated individuals at Folsom Prison, and just last month directed a unique student production called the Forum Theater Festival, where audience members were literally brought upon the stage to act alongside students in plays addressing social issues like abortion and gender violence. In today's episode, we discuss her career in theater, how her work influences her teaching, and why she feels art can make a positive impact on her students, the region, and the world. Erin Kaplan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I heard that you were pursuing law school at some point. So how did you shift from that to theater?
I was a theater kid from as far back as I can remember. And I had this idea once I went to college that I had to stop doing theater and get a real job. And I am from a family with, I literally cannot count how many lawyers I have in terms of aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings. And that was just what we did. And I was always deeply engaged in politics, watched way too much Aaron Sorkin, The American President, The West Wing. So my plan was to go to law school and focus on constitutional law and human rights law, and then go and do that work out in the world. And I just couldn't stop doing theater. And the first time I did theater in a girls' detention facility in Michigan, something clicked that I can do theater and I can engage in politics and social justice, and that those can be one and the same. And then I just could not bring myself to register for the LSAT, and that was when I knew I was never going to go to law school. I was going to do something else.
And then how did you then shift to wanting to teach?
I didn't want to graduate from college. I wanted to stay. I graduated with a BA in English literature, political science, and drama. And I was on the phone with my mom, actually, towards the end of my senior year. And I was saying, look, I think if I stay one more semester, I can bang out a women's studies BA, because I had already taken some women's studies classes that were cross-listed with English or with drama or with political science. And my mom kind of flippantly said, you need to graduate college. You cannot stay here forever. If you want to stay forever, go become a professor, but you're done. And I was like, oh, I could be in college forever. I just need to actually go to college forever and get a master's and a PhD and all of the letters after your name. But ever since then, that was what I wanted to do. And I took some time off between my bachelor's and master's. Do we really want to do this? Had a real job. Yes, I wanted to do it. Got my master's, same thing, took a couple years and worked. Do I really want to get my PhD? Yep. And here I am.
You mentioned the experience at the University of Michigan working with incarcerated people. Can you just tell me, I'm interested in a few things, actually. One, if there was something about that experience that, something in particular that you could remember about that experience that really resonated with you to the point where you're still involved in this kind of work. And also, how the incarcerated individuals benefit from something like this. So
the answer to both of those questions is actually the same. And I'm going to go a little theory on you here. But I am a student of Paulo Freire. I have read everything I think that he's written that has been translated into English. And his seminal text is Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Augusto Boal actually names Theater of the Oppressed in homage to Freire. So Freire was from Recife, which is northern Brazil. Boal is from Rio. So they really worked together and kind of looked at the world in similar ways. And for Freire, he looks at the educational system, and what we have in the U.S. is banking education, he calls it, which is education is like a bank. You put the information into your students, and then you expect them to spit it back out. And what he argues for is what he calls co-intentional education, where we educate each other by sharing stories, because I am the master, expert, and knower of my experience. And you are the master, expert, and knower of your experience. And I cannot know your experience, and you cannot know mine, but we can teach each other by sharing those stories. He calls that dialogics. And for Boal, theater is the dialogue. And so when I was doing the work in prisons, I was, as a 19-year-old college student, I was learning so much. And all the preconceived notions I had about the kinds of people who end up incarcerated, and I know they did something bad, but they still deserve art, and really contextualizing who these people are, and that, what is it to have your entire life defined by your biggest mistake, and how that looks for people who are white versus black or brown, how that looks for people who have means, people who do not. And so I learned so much. But then also I had all this theater training, and I was able to bring that to the people I worked with. And yes, we play and we have fun, but so much of being incarcerated is performance, is performing as tough, performing as strong. And so actually getting them to take off those masks and play and have fun and create ensemble and work together and trust each other and trust their own voice and gain confidence speaking in front of a group of people. So I learned from them, they learned from me, and then we actually had performances where we would bring in audience members from the outside. So my friends, my family are hanging out in the prison, shaking hands with the incarcerated people that I've been working with, and it humanizes the incarcerated people for the audience members, and it also validates this experience and stories of the incarcerated folks to have people from the outside come in. And it was like, this is what Frede was talking about. Like, we are all learning from each other. And there's nothing I enjoy more than that. So, yeah.
Could you just define the practice of theater of the oppressed? I mean, I feel like you're touching on it already, but if you like the elevator pitch.
Yeah. So there's actually an image that is the definition of theater of the oppressed, and it's a tree. And so in its roots, there are ethics and solidarity. There are a bunch of things. I don't really remember all of them, but the main components are, the trunk is image theater. Image being a universal language. When Boal was developing this, he was working with indigenous populations. He was working all over Latin America. He was working in Europe. Not everyone speaks the same language. And so images can be a universal language without having to use words. We use images. And then from there is forum theater, which is what I primarily do. And then there are different branches. So there's newspaper theater, invisible theater, rainbow of desire, legislative theater. But really at the core is image theater work and forum. And the idea of forum theater, which is that audiences come up on stage, came from work Boal was doing in Peru. There was a play about a woman who was being abused by her husband, and they offered the audience members to suggest what the actress should do. And this audience member kept raising her hand and saying, "No, you're not doing it right. No, you're not doing it right. That's not what I'm saying." And so Boal got frustrated and said, "Fine, just come up and show us." And that is where forum theater was birthed. This opportunity to let audience members practice for things that they might encounter in real life. Boal calls it a rehearsal for revolution.
I really love that. As a studio artist, I found that visual language, transcends spoken language, and it's really been helpful traveling abroad. If I really need something, I can just draw a picture of it and show it to the person, and I get a good laugh, and then they really want to help me figure this thing out. I didn't, think about it on the level that you're talking about, but there was a shared experience there with that person as well. Yeah. And, I laid some of myself out on the line for them, and it made them, want to join in and help what I was doing.
Yeah. When you offer vulnerability, people offer it back. And so much of creating art with people in theater is offering each other vulnerability and welcoming and caring for each other as we do that.
I think also that's why I loved hearing about what you were doing with the prisoners, because I'm just a longtime believer in healing through storytelling. And it's for the same reason, if somebody is vulnerable in front of you, it's hard not to love that person in return.
Yeah. We say that this work is not therapy, but it is therapeutic.
So can you tell me a little bit about the work that you did at Folsom State Prison?
Yeah, so I spent 8 months working at Folsom State in a theater workshop. Most of what I do is devised original theater. I think it's really valuable to do Shakespeare and to do scripted plays, but what I really, my artistry is using the tools I have as a theater artist to give people space to create their own stories and tell their own stories. So that's devised theater, creating original work. Mm-hmm. Whoever's in the room, those are your writers, your directors. They go from nothing to a full production. And I had the true joy of working with a student co-facilitator from Sac State. She recently graduated, Scarlett Pasquale, who was just absolutely amazing, had never done prison work before. She was a criminal justice major, theater minor, and just jumped in. And so the two of us went in every second Tuesday and first Sunday of the month and created an original play with the men inside. And, some of the actors were just truly, truly amazing actors. And some of them were not, but they went up there and they did their thing. And you see somebody at the very beginning of the workshop who doesn't want to participate, who's standing on the outside, who never speaks up, and then at the end of the play is the one who's like yelling the last line. And to see that growth is just such an amazing and gratifying experience. I'm in the early stages of working to create my own program in the theater department that is going to send students out to do community-based theater work as part of a service learning program. So that is something I hope to create over the next few years.
What then is next for you, and how are you engaging students and involving them?
So there are a few different elements happening. Generally, a forum theater festival, that's not really how you do forum theater. Mm-hmm. Most often, forum theater is done with a community for that community, not for ticket sales. But I really wanted to take this opportunity, especially with the election coming up, to remind people that they have the power to change things and also to introduce the work to the community. It's very, very difficult to explain forum theater to people. I had several people after the show come up to me and say, look, you explained it 5 times. You were very clear. I did not understand it until I saw it. So it's an opportunity to kind of explain to the community what's happening. And then my goal is to develop a course in applied theater and theater for social change where students will do theater of the oppressed work and some other applied theater techniques. And then that would be the prerequisite course to then go and do a community-based theater class where they're working in prisons or in juvenile detention centers or, in on a shelter for the unhoused or in mental health facilities and going and working in community. And that's the educational experience, right? It's that co-intentional education. We learn from each other. We learn by teaching each other. And I was very lucky. I actually studied with Augusto Boal in 2007 at the Center for Theater of the Oppressed in Rio de Janeiro. And one of his jokers, so jokers are facilitators, and they're jokers because a joker can be anything in a deck of cards. Yeah. So it's La Sistema Coringa, the joker system. And one of his jokers, Geo Brito, was one of my teachers. And we've stayed in touch over the last 15 years. And he actually came to Sac State, worked with my actors, and then gave a university open to everybody, community as well, workshop. And we are hoping to establish a partnership with, he's now at the Popular Theater School in Brazil with Julian Boal, Augusto Boal's son. But we're hoping to develop, maybe a program where our students can go and work with them and really learn from, like go to the source, so to speak. Yeah.
I really love this idea of getting the students engaged internationally. So you're talking about sending students to Rio de Janeiro. Mm-hmm. As a Sac State alum, that's the kind of hands-on experience that our students get and then I got going here. And so I really love that idea. If you could, I know I keep asking you to define things. What is the Forum Theater Festival explanation that you gave so clearly?
Well, what we created as a company, so there were a little over 20 students in the company. We spent the first several weeks doing ensemble building. The Theater of the Oppressed system, there are all these different exercises and activities so that we can listen to everything we hear, feel everything we touch, see everything we look at, and use our combined senses. It's also about like sort of deprogramming our bodies. Boal is very Marxist in that like your labor defines who you are, and how you sell your labor defines who you are. And so we really want to work to undo that in our bodies. If you work at a desk, you're hunched over. Or if you're working in the fields, your body is different. So physical exercises as well, trust exercises. And then we began creating a working definition of oppression for our group. And then the students all shared in small groups stories of a time that they felt oppressed. And then they used those stories to generate their own original plays. So in some instances, several people had a similar story, and so they made up an original story that's based on elements of other people's stories. In some instances, they might say, hey, look, your story really speaks to all of us. Would it be okay if we use your story? And only the people in those small groups know where the stories came from. So I have no idea. And then we rehearsed those. They're called anti-models. And the reason they're called an anti-model is because they don't end well. So in a traditional, linear narrative structure, you have your exposition, your rising action, your climax, your falling action, your resolution. In Theater of the Oppressed, you have your exposition. We meet the characters. They're really happy. Everything's great. We see what they want and how excited they are to get that thing that they want. And then in the rising action, we see the oppression start to happen, and then there's the climax, something terrible happens, and then there's the unraveling. And we just see the beginning of the unraveling. Boal calls it Chinese crisis because the symbol in Mandarin for crisis and opportunity are one and the same. And so when we have a crisis, we also have an opportunity. And so then as a joker facilitator, and I had two amazing student co-jokers, Meg Greer and Nova Walter, both were my stage managers. And so they each took turns stage managing 2 nights and co-jokering with me 2 nights, and they were phenomenal, both of them. So the jokers then say to the audience, do we like what happened to Charlotte? And the audience says no, because we designed it that way. And then you say to the audience, okay, we're going to start the play again. But anytime you think Charlotte can make a different choice, yell stop. And you have them practice. And, we do warm-ups at the beginning, so they're on their feet and they're talking. And just to make it clear, like, this is not a normal play. And we say, this is not a normal play. And then the first time an audience calls stop, as a joker, you say, oh, hi, tell me your name. Why did you call stop? And they tell you, and they say, well, I think she should do this. Great. Come on up on stage and show us what it looks like. And then you turn your back and start clapping for them. And then the audience kind of gets behind them and starts clapping and cheering. And we basically use peer pressure. We actually use a little bit of oppression to get them to come up on stage. So then after they try so the spectator becomes a spect actor. And after the intervention, you have this, couple minutes conversation. Like, what did this person try? What was successful? What challenges might happen if somebody tried this in the real world? And then awesome. Anyone else have an idea of any place where this character could make a different choice? And so, and they're going to the first scene, and then the fourth scene, and then the second scene, and then the fifth scene, and then the third scene, and you're moving props and everything all over the stage, and the audience just gets to practice. Sometimes audience members are not super engaged, and then you pick up the play where they left off and you wait for someone to call stop again. But we had 3 out of 4 audiences were people were raising their hands constantly with all of these wild, interesting, funny ideas for how to break the oppression. And then, at the end, we were like, we just had an hour-long brainstorming session about how to deal with this very, very real problem.
Yeah.
And so everybody leaves having practiced.
The practice of doing the thing and coming up with the ideas, seeing how they would play out in real time.
And sometimes, you have for example, we had an anti-model that was about sexual assault, and anybody can spect act for the protagonist. And so you have a guy coming up and, like, I'm going to be all tough and whatever. And the person who's playing the oppressor has to be really good at improvisation because you don't know what the audience is going to throw at you, and sexually harasses this, young man who then is like, oh, wow, that is deeply uncomfortable and I don't like that feeling. And so it also forces you to be in somebody else's shoes.
All right. Well, I would like to shift to a lightning round. I've got some quick questions for you.
I'll try to be concise. I'm not good at it.
Well, what was your first theater role?
Probably a townsperson in high school. Probably a townsperson. My first real role when I was in undergrad, my amazing, amazing theater director, Kate Mendeloff, who passed away just a couple of years ago, as I was moving out of my dorm room, she said, come to auditions because there's this Shakespeare in the Arb. It's this massive arboretum in Ann Arbor. And I was like, I'm moving out. I don't have time. And she said, just come. She handed me a script. It was like a photocopy and it was faded and I could barely read it. And I just did the audition and left. And she cast me as Helena in Midsummer Night's Dream. And that was when I realized oh, I might be good at this. Yeah. So that was my first real role. But yeah, lots of townspeople, and because I'm
start somewhere,
and because I'm tall and I have a lower voice, I was cast as male character. I played Hugo Peabody at my camp production of Bye Bye Birdie because I was tall and could sing tenor. So yeah,
and makes for a good story.
Yeah,
right?
Why not?
So, what is your favorite play or musical?
Oh, that is impossible. That's like asking me to choose my favorite child.
I thought about changing it up a little bit for that reason.
My favorite playwrights, Bertolt Brecht, who is very much pre-Boal. Boal really builds on Brecht. Griselda Gambaro, who writes about rising fascism, which is a very valuable thing to be looking at right now, around the dirty war in Argentina. I love Shakespeare. I'm a Shakespeare nerd. Susan Laurie Parks is amazing. Adrienne Kennedy is amazing. James I. James. There's so many. I'm not as much of a musical person as a play person, but my favorite musical is probably Cabaret because it's political.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. All right. Now, finally, would you say Macbeth in a theater?
I have done it occasionally by accident. Oh. But no. Actually, my kids even know. My 7 and 9-year-old know that if you're in a theater, you call it the Scottish play. And my 7-year-old daughter will call you out if you say that in a theater. So
that's fantastic.
Best not to mess with fate.
I was supposed to offer you money to say it, but I like your answer as is.
Yeah. You know what? We're not going to mess with the fates.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Beyond Jay is a production of University Communications at Sacramento State. Our producer is Jonathan Morales. Photography and videography by Bibiana Ortiz. And editing by me, your host, Philip Allstott. If you liked this episode, please leave us a review and consider following us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have questions or comments, email us at communications@csus.edu. And visit us online at csus.edu/beyondj.